they cut off your ears if they don't like your face. It's barbaric, but hey, it's home. This is a lyric from Disney's original song, Arabian Nights, from the movie Aladdin, back during its original release back in 1992. This lyric was then later revised due to racist allegations. However, it stands as a clear example of Orientalist stereotypes within American culture and society. Orientalism, as defined by Edward Said, is the way that Americans and Western European countries depict the Middle East as uncivilized, mysterious, and sexually exotic. Good morning, my name is Sophia Jarawi, and this is Orientalism and Stereotypes of Middle Eastern Culture. Today we will be answering the crucial question of, to what extent can Orientalism be used as a framework to assess U.S. misconceptions of Middle Eastern and North African, or MANA, culture? My argument is that Orientalism is a useful discourse for analyzing the misconceptions of Middle Eastern culture because it reveals the stereotypical and racist attitudes of MANA culture within the United States. As provided by the College Board stimulus, Confrontation on the Bridge and Moral Courage and Intelligent Disobedience serves as excellent reminders that authority figures within society often try to divide and conquer us, often making us turn against minority groups. As we can see within this image, the dog represents the authority figure clearly oppressing minority communities within society. In Moral Courage and Intelligent Disobedience, it states, senior officials altered reports to fit a political narrative. It took moral courage and an act of intelligent disobedience to go around the hierarchy of the press to report the misuse of power, clearly showing excellent examples of this. For my claims, I'll be discussing literature, gender stereotypes, religious stereotypes, and MANA Americans. To begin with Orientalist literature, Tyler, an American author from the early 1800s, wrote a book called The Algerian Captive during the Tripolitan War, a U.S. military campaign in North Africa back in the 1800s. This book centered around the life of an adventurous American man traveling throughout North Africa. It depicted it as barbaric and uncivilized. By doing this, it helped the American public gain support for the military presence within North Africa at this time. Sykes, a British imperial traveler during this time, propagandized his published versus unpublished journal. He simply depicted it as being uncivilized. Within his unpublished journal, he depicted an evening parade in which people of all genders, ethnicities, and religions were happily celebrating, praising the Sultan, the political leader at that time. However, in the published version, he dwindled the significance of and the support of the Sultan and also depicted it as a downtrodden peasantry, with, quote, uncivilized people playing musical instruments. By depicting them this way, it helped the British public gain support for politically intervening within the Middle East and North Africa. By dwindling the support of the political leader, it made this place seem as though it is willing to be conquered by imperial nations. Lastly, Shelley, a romantic poet from the mid-1800s, wrote fantastical poems about the Middle East, such as Ozymandias. By depicting the Middle East as, quote, antique and lifeless, it simply mocked ancient Egyptian civilization, depicting it as a place which was destined to fail, not because of its tyranny, but because of its inferior racial status. Next, there are multiple stereotypes of Middle Eastern women, most notably, the oppressed conservative housewives with no freedom, the oppressed concubines, and the sexually liberated belly-dancing women with Western values. The stereotype of the oppressed conservative housewife spread post 9/11 with the introduction of Islamophobia. As we can see in this painting by Hunt, an American artist in the 1860s, this Middle Eastern man is shown silencing his wife, with her wearing a traditional niqab, showing the stereotype of the oppressed conservative housewives. Next, the stereotype of the oppressed concubines. Oftentimes, these Middle Eastern women were depicted as overly sexualized and mysterious. By doing this, it made them seem as though that white men should instead take these Middle Eastern women for themselves and enjoy them instead of letting Middle Eastern men enjoy them. Lastly, the stereotype of the sexually liberated belly-dancing women came from the need of white American women to channel their doubts regarding post-9/11 war into a liberal, mystical, and neo-Orientalist way. They tried to facilitate cultural exchange through belly dancing. However, according to Mara 317, instead of doing this in a respectful way, it only worsened cultural appropriation. As these white American belly dancing women state, we stay away from Arabic clubs, weddings, and restaurants. Arab men don't see you as showgirls. They don't see you as artists. They see you as showgirls. I don't like the vibe at Arabic places from the men and even from the women. This shows how it only worsens cultural appropriation. Next, there are multiple issues with the religious representation. Orientalist Islam is much more multidimensional and older than Islamophobia. Islamophobia focuses on the stereotypical politically oppressive Islamic regime, rather than the multidimensional Orientalist Islam. Orientalist Islam simply depicts it as mysterious, a simple stereotype that came from older generations. Islam is often depicted as mysterious, male-dominated, destructive, and oppressive. It is often coupled with Judaism as, quote, the less civilized Abrahamic religions. Oftentimes, Jews are imagined as Oriental in order to create an analogy between the Jewish Old Testament and the Christian New Testament, simply depicting it as inferior to the Christians. Next, there are multiple examples of Orientalism within popular culture. As we can see in this image from Dune Part 2, we can see that there's a white American actress who is shown wearing North African traditional clothes, appropriating the culture. In Cardi B's music video for Bodak Yellow, she is shown dressed in Arabian traditional clothes, riding camels, belly dancing, and attending inappropriate clubs with men dressed in Arabian traditional religious clothes. Lastly, in Katy Perry's music video for Dark Horse, she is a white woman who is shown appropriating ancient Egyptian culture. Now, there are multiple negative impacts of this, most notably the support for U.S. military presence in the region. According to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs in 2020, 45% of Americans said that U.S. military presence should be maintained. 29% of Americans said that U.S. military presence should be increased. Now, people may argue that this is due to the fact that there are oppressive, tyrannical regimes within this region which do not support human rights. Well, let's compare this to another example, the fictional city of Agrabah from Aladdin. When Republicans were surveyed in 2016, 30% of them said that they would support bombing Agrabah. 57% were undecided, and only 13% said that they would not support bombing this fictional city. My apologies.
Hit slideshow.
I'm so sorry.
No, stop. You keep clicking things and it's freaking the machine out.
30% of Republicans said that they would support bombing the fictional city of Agrabah. 57% were undecided, and only 13% said that they would not support bombing this fictional city. This shows how these stereotypes of Middle Eastern culture are so deeply ingrained that we have learned to hate a place which doesn't even exist, a fictional city with no human rights violations nor tyrannical governments. Lastly, this causes multiple negative impacts, such as acculturative stress in Mana Americans. 60% of Middle Eastern Americans reported depression caused by acculturative stress, which is significantly higher than other minority and ethnic groups. Lastly, in conclusion, Orientalism is highly applicable while understanding U.S. attitudes of the Middle East. However, it is mainly applicable while analyzing past attitudes, or the prerequisites to our current attitudes, which is a limitation. It is not an actual effect of racism, but simply a discourse, a means used to explain the racism of the Middle East. Lastly, Orientalism is applicable to a wide extent, but not always. And here's my works cited.
All right, 2 questions for you. Sorry. First up, how'd your research question evolve as you worked your way through the entire process, and then what impact did that have?
My research question did greatly evolve. Originally, my research question was supposed to be, how did the philosophy of Orientalism affect stereotypes of the Middle East? But then I realized that, as I mentioned within my conclusion, Orientalism is not actually an impact or effect of racism, nor a cause. It is simply used as a discourse, or a means to explain it. So I changed it to what extent Orientalism can be used to a framework to better suit the actual philosophy of Orientalism itself.
And if you would have had more time, what additional research would you have conducted?
If I had more additional time, I would have tried to find more about the actual statistics regarding the stereotypes and hate crimes against Arab Americans and Middle Eastern Americans. However, unfortunately, the federal government banned the collection of this data since 9/11. So because of that, all of the info I found was very old. But if I could, I would have tried to search harder.